So the combat and boss fights of Black Myth Wukong are a huge part of why people are so excited for this game. It looks like it's going to have some of the most enjoyable combat that we've experienced in 2024. And today I wanted to break down pretty much everything we know about each aspect of the combat so that you guys know everything you need to know heading into the game in only about 5 or so days. Now, the first thing that I wanted to talk about is actually to do with the stance system, which is a very interesting mechanic and something that I think is going to allow us to have a little bit of customization when it comes to that combat. The developers themselves, as well as a lot of journalists who have had their hands on the game early, have confirmed that there are 3 stances in the game, or at least 3 that we know of anyway. There may potentially be more that are unknown. And these 3 stances essentially just change the way that we play just a little bit. None of them are crazy. It's not like whole new weapons and stuff like that. It is just a slight change in our stance to pretty much give us a bunch of new movesets, and some of it looks pretty interesting. Now, the first stance that we obviously start off with, this one is called the Smash stance, and it is essentially just the jack of all trades. Like I said, it's kind of like the base stance, and so there's not too much to explain here. It is pretty much just the regular combat, with Wukong obviously using his staff and using it in a pretty regular manner. We then also have the pillar stance, which they've confirmed you unlock at about level 20, although keep in mind that may obviously be changed by the time the game launches. And the pillar stance is definitely a little bit different than what we get to experience with the Smash stance. Now, in this pillar stance, there are a few different movesets that allow us to play pretty differently. There's this one that you can see here where the staff actually sort of extends, and we're even able to climb all the way up to the very top of this staff. And what this does is it pretty much allows us to dodge all ground damage. So if enemies are either A, kind of small and they're trying to hit us, they essentially can't do that, or B, if they're using area of effect attacks that are hitting the ground, not so much the air, then we can pretty much avoid that damage as well. Now, we've seen a few clips where you can still get hit, obviously, when you're at the top of that staff, so it's not like we're completely immune to damage, but that damage is only damage that's dealt in the air. Anything that damages on the ground, we will pretty much be able to avoid that, which is pretty cool to see. Now, this also then leads into a really extended attack, kind of like a ranged attack with this staff, which is something that is very different to that Smash stance, because obviously that's a lot more up close and personal, whereas this pillar stance is going to allow us to have a little bit more range. Is going to be very helpful for a lot of those boss fights that are really big bosses, or as we see in this clip, fighting sort of aerial enemies that are, you know, like the dragon and stuff like that, where that little bit of extra range is going to be very, very helpful. Now, lastly, there is also a third stance, but we actually know nothing about that just yet. Game Science have kept that pretty quiet. Even the people who have had their hands on the game, they said that they weren't able to find out what that third stance is. So we're not too sure what that is for right now. Judging by the pillar stance, I'm going to assume this one is also pretty different compared to the Smash stance. So I am very keen to see what that third stance actually is. Now, something else very interesting about the combat in this game is that there is actually no blocking and parrying, which is one thing that's going to really differentiate it from a Souls-like that it has kind of been compared to in the lead up to the game, even though it turns out it's not actually that similar to a Souls-like at all. The only ways in this game to block damage is essentially an ability that we can get through one of the skill trees that will block ranged attacks, but this is also technically an attack, so it's kind of an ability that we use, and it can deal damage, but it can also block incoming ranged attacks, so bow and arrows and stuff like that. This clip here is essentially all we can see of that ability, and so that is technically one way that we can block, but like I said, that's an actual ability rather than just like holding a block button and being able to block all incoming damage. Now, we have also seen a few clips of some sort of like parry ability, but again, it looks like it's an actual ability rather than just pressing the block button at the right time or something like that. The journalists who have had their hands on the game early have all said that there is no like actual block button and stuff. So again, this must be some sort of ability that we can use that will no doubt have some sort of cooldown and stuff, so we can't use it all the time, only on occasion essentially. Outside of that, the only way to avoid any damage is actually dodging, or technically, like I said, using that pillar stance. You can avoid some damage that way too, but this is going to be a bit more of sort of a dodge spamming type of game where you need to time your dodges in order to avoid the incoming damage. So it is going to be a little bit more in line with sort of martial arts rather than the typical Souls-like combat of blocking and parrying, which I know a lot of people are actually really excited for. Now, before we go any further, if you guys are new to the channel and you're interested in more Black Myth Wukong content, be sure to hit that subscribe button. There is plenty more content on the way, so make sure you don't miss out. Now, something else very interesting about the combat in this game is that it is confirmed we are able to use different spells, and it has been confirmed there are going to be 4 slots for us to essentially put these spells in. There will no doubt be more than 4 actual spells, but we can kind of equip 4 at any given time, which is going to allow us a little bit more customization in terms of our playstyle, similar to those stances that I mentioned earlier. Now, unfortunately, unfortunately, we don't really know too much about these spells just yet. There hasn't really been any word from Game Science on some of the spells that we can expect to see. What it looks like is in this clip here, we can see Wukong seemingly using a spell, and then it actually kind of clones himself, and there's a bunch of different Wukongs out there attacking this boss. Now, to me, that does look like one of these spells, so I'm going to assume that is kind of the thing we can expect to see. There'll obviously be plenty of different spells. Some of these spells may even be things like giving us little buffs and even like regaining health and stuff like that. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of different stuff to use, but as far as I know, that is what using a spell actually looks like. And so I'm very keen to see some of these spells that we can actually unlock and equip throughout our journey. Now, finally, the most important point as far as I'm concerned is something that is going to be awesome to use throughout this game, and I cannot wait to get my hands on it. And this is essentially the shape-shifting mechanic that allows us to pretty much transform Wukong into different bosses that we've beaten throughout our journey, allowing us to massively change up our playstyle, pretty much being like the stance system on absolute steroids. Now, we've seen plenty of gameplay of this. We know that when we're playing as Wukong, the only weapon we have is his staff, and we only have those stances. So all the combat that we see of just Wukong, it's all pretty similar even between those stances. It's all just kind of using that staff, but we have seen a lot of gameplay where we clearly look very, very different. We are taking on the forms of these different bosses, and from what we can see, it looks like we essentially get all of their abilities and stuff too, so not just their regular attacks. We're going to get some like ranged attacks and all those sorts of things, as well as actually getting some slightly different weapons rather than just using that staff like we can with Wukong. Now, from what I can tell looking at all of this gameplay, it looks like when you do shapeshift into a boss form, you'll have about a 100-second timer, and that means that you will pretty much take on that form for 100 seconds. It may be different depending on the quality of that boss, so if it's a really, really strong boss build, then maybe it's less time just to make sure that you're not overpowered, but we will essentially have that 90 to 100-second timer, at which point, once that runs out, we will pretty much transform back into Wukong. So this isn't like a permanent thing. You can't just always be playing as a certain boss. And the other thing to note as well is that if you die while you're playing as that boss, or I should say in that boss form, you won't actually die. You will just lose the form and then you'll go back to Wukong. So that's something else that has been confirmed. All damage that you take while you're in that boss form, that is not damage that's being done to Wukong. That's damage being done to that form, meaning that these are essentially massive buffs. And even if you die, you actually don't die. You'll just go back to playing Wukong with the health that you had before you entered that boss form. So it looks like these boss forms are going to be absolutely crucial. It looks like we're going to really need to make the most of them in a lot of boss fights, because like I said, it's kind of like doubling your health, if not potentially more, and all of that damage that you take, you're pretty much avoiding taking that to Wukong himself, which is going to be very, very clutch in some of those more difficult boss fights. But that is pretty much all that we know so far about the combat in Black Myth Wukong. I'm interested to hear what you guys are most excited for, whether it's the different stances or whether it is those boss forms. So be sure to leave a comment down below and let me know. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.